Let me describe a moment many of you have lived through, even if you've never said it out loud. Something has gone wrong. A diagnosis no one saw coming, a marriage quietly coming apart, a child in trouble you cannot fix, a door that slammed shut on the life you were counting on. And in the small hours of the night, when no one is watching and all the defenses are down, a question surfaces. Not the calm, philosophical, why do bad things happen, but something sharper and far more personal. What did I do to deserve this? And as I preach this sermon, I am not creating a straw man here. In the saga that my family is going through with my kids' health and the challenges there, I admit there have been moments where that question has creeped into my mind. That question is almost reflexive. Religious and irreligious people reach for it alike. We comb back through our lives looking for the sin, the failure, the things that we must be paying for now. And underneath it sits a picture of God, a picture so common we rarely notice we are holding it. We picture a God who keeps accounts. A God whose hand is behind the tumor and the layoff and the accident, and he's evening up the books. A God whose love is real but conditional, and who has this time decided you have it coming. That is the myth we are naming today. And like last week, it's not a harmless one. It takes people who are already suffering and hands them to a second wound. The belief that the God they were running to for comfort is the one who arranged the pain. The myth goes like this. Suffering is God's judicial system. Sin goes in, disaster comes out. If something terrible has happened to you, somewhere there is an account being settled. You hear it in the things people say without thinking. What comes around goes around. God is trying to teach you something. I won't ask for a raising of hands, anyone who has heard these. But that one I kind of feel like is worthy of being FedEx to Jesus. Everything happens for a reason. Said to a grieving parent, as if there was a reason that could ever be worth it. It's the spiritual cousin of karma baptized through and brought to the church. Or more sinister, there must be some unrepentant sin in your life, and that's why God is allowing this to happen. And it's ancient. It's the entire argument of Job's friends who sit with him in his ruin and slowly become convinced that a man suffering this much must have done something to earn it. It is so deeply assumed that even Jesus' own disciples take it for granted, which is exactly where our text begins. If you look at John 9, verses 1 to 3. Jesus said his disciples were walking, and they pass a man who has been blind since birth. The disciples see him and ask to them what seems obvious to them. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Notice the assumption buried in that question. They are not asking whether sin caused the blindness. They take that for granted. They are only working out whose sin it was. Who's to blame? The categories are already fixed. Suffering exists, therefore guilt exists. The only open question is the name on the invoice. The commentators point out how trapped this logic is. If the man was born blind, when could he have possibly sinned? Some rabbis have speculated about sin in the womb, and others reach back to the parents. The disciples are standing in front of a human being and seeing a theological puzzle, a case to be solved rather than a person to be loved. And Jesus refuses the entire frame. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in him. That first phrase is the demolition. Neither or neither. Jesus does not adjust the blame or redistribute it more fairly. He throws out the premise that blame is what we're looking for. He will not let the man's suffering be read as a verdict. Then he reframes everything around the future, not the past. Not whose fault is this, but what will God do here? And the very next thing he does is heal him. Now, I want to make a comment on the phrase, so that. Jesus is not saying God blinded the man 30 years to set up a sermon illustration. The Greek runs on without any tidy punctuation. And that's one of the challenges with the Greek. There is no punctuation, and it's all jammed together. They don't even put space between words. So when interpreters are wrestling with this, we got to figure out where the comma and the periods go as we try to understand it. And it's a real challenge. And we're also trying to translate a Hebrew mindset, speaking Aramaic, writing in Greek. And they're all dead languages. So we have to be careful here with that stuff. And I think the message, even though it is often referred to as a paraphrase, I don't think it's a paraphrase, but and Peterson does a really great job here on that verse. It says, Jesus said, you're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame. There is no such cause and effect here. Look instead for what God can do. Jesus pivots from a question about cause to the things he is about to do about it. The point is not that God authored the dark, it's that God is about to act in the darkness. We can also look at the Gospel of Luke, chapter 13, verses 1 to 5. If John 9 dismantles this myth, Luke 13 shows Jesus is dismantling it on purpose. This isn't just a one-off. People come to him with the news of the day. Pilate has slaughtered some Galileans in the very act of worship. Their blood mingled with the sacrifices. The unspoken question hangs in the air. They must have done something. And Jesus meets it head on in Luke 13, verses 2 to 3. Do you think that these Galileans were worse sinners than all the other Galileans because they suffered in this way? Then he reaches for a second example, the Tower of Siloam, which collapsed and killed 18 people. A pure accident. No pilot, no villain involved. And he says the same question and gives the same answer. Do you think that they were guiltier than everyone else in Jerusalem? No. Twice, on two kinds of tragedy, one caused by human violence, one by sheer accident, Jesus is asked to confirm the punishment theology, and twice he flatly refuses it. This is Jesus going out of his way to pull the wiring out of it. When tragedy strikes, he says, stop reading it as a scoreboard. Now, if God is not the one handing out suffering as punishment, where does it come from? And my goal here is not to just leave you with I don't know. And I found the work of Dr. Gregory Boyd very helpful here. He argues that the Bible is not actually a picture of our world as a tightly controlled system, where every event flows directly from the will of God. It pictures a world at war. A good creation that has come under the sways of powers in rebellion against God. What the New Testament calls principalities, the rulers of this world, the enemy. Boyd calls this warfare worldview, and it runs from Genesis to Revelation. On that reading, the world is genuinely contested. It contains real evil, real chaos, real free agents, human and otherwise, capable of doing real damage that God did not want and did not author. When Jesus meets sickness, he does not interpret it as the Father's will being done. He confronts it as an intrusion, something to be pushed back. He rebukes fevers. He treats suffering the way we treat an enemy, not a lesson. And the New Testament gets more specific than a world at war. It says the world has a usurper. 3 times in John's gospel, Jesus calls Satan the ruler of this world. And all 3 times he says it precisely to announce that this ruler is being thrown out. John 12:31, now the ruler of this world will be cast out. John 14:30, the ruler of this world is coming and he has no claim on me. John 16 verse 11, the ruler of this world is judged. Jesus does not pretend the world is under benign management. He names the occupation. He simply refuses to let the conqueror or the occupier keep the ground. Look at the temptation in the wilderness. Satan shows Jesus all the kingdoms of the world and offers them. To you I will give you all this authority, for it has been handed over to me. And notice what Jesus does not do. He never argues that point. He refuses the shortcut, but he does not say the authority isn't Satan's to offer. In some real, temporary, illegitimate way, the world has been seized. There is a throne to be reclaimed, and he intends to reclaim it. That is why Jesus' ministry reads the way it does. He does not treat sickness and torment as the Father's discipline to be quietly accepted. He treats them as an enemy held ground to be liberated. In the beginning of Jesus' ministry, he states, no one can plunder a strong man's house, he says, unless he first ties up the strong man. Mark 3:27. And that is exactly what he is doing. When the disciples return astonished that even the demons submit to them, he says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Every healing, every person set free is a square foot of occupied territory being taken back. The cross is war where the war is decisively won. There, God disarmed the powers and the authorities and made a public spectacle of them, as Colossians 2:15 says. Even as the final surrender is still being worked out. I love this illustration of that. World War II ended on D-Day. It just took a year to get there. Once the Allies landed on mainland Europe, it was over. Jesus' death and resurrection on the cross defeated the principalities and powers. And now we walk towards that final defeat. This matters enormously because it gives us a way to say something true and something honest at the same time. Bad things happen, and they're not God's verdict on you. I feel like I should get you to repeat that. The tumor is not a sentence. The accident is not a message. We live in a world that is real enough to break, among forces that are real enough to break it. And a great deal of our suffering is simply what it looks like when a good world is not yet fully healed. Scripture is not embarrassed to leave some of this unexplained. The book of Job spends 38 chapters refusing every neat theological answers his friends offer him. Just as a little side note, if anyone is ever quoting one of Job's friends to you as advice, walk away. Even God says they're morons. And when God finally speaks, he does not hand Job a reason. He hands Job himself. Sometimes the most faithful thing the Bible does is decline to give us the explanation we are demanding. Let me say plainly why this is not just a theological footnote and why it's worth spending a whole Sunday on. First, the punishment myth isolates the very people who most need to be held. It tells the cancer patient, the widow, the parent at a graveside, this is on you. It takes pain and pours shame on top of it, and shame drives people into hiding exactly at the moment they need to be carried. I've watched people stop coming to church because they were sure that what had happened to them was the visible proof of God's displeasure in them. And they could not bear to sit among people they assumed God was pleased with. Second, it turns us into Job's friends. As I said earlier, you don't want to be in that group. When we believe suffering is always earned, we cannot simply sit with someone in their grief. We start looking for what they did. We offer explanations no one asked for. The punishment myth makes comforters into prosecutors. Third, and most damaging, it makes God unsafe. If every hard thing might be the hand of God evening the score, then you can never fully rest in him. You will obey him the way you obey someone who might hurt you. And the moment real suffering comes, as it comes to everyone, your faith and your pain will be pointed out as at the same target, and you will have nowhere to run. Because the one you would run to is the one you suspect of doing this to you. That is not the gospel. That is a God who cannot be loved, a God that can only be managed. So here's the truth. Let's turn this myth around. The myth says God sent this to punish you. The truth of the gospel is stranger and far better than that, and it is at the heart of this whole series. God does not explain your suffering. He enters it. This is the move that the whole Bible is making, and it lands at the incarnation. We keep demanding that God answer our suffering from a safe distance, a memo from heaven explaining the reasons. Instead, God comes down into it. He takes on a body that can be exhausted and betrayed and nailed to a piece of wood. At the tomb of his friend Lazarus, a death he is moments away from undoing, Jesus does not lecture the grieving sister about God's bigger plan here. The shortest verse in the Bible tells us what God does in the face of death. It says, and Jesus wept. Who here memorized that for Sunday school? Brian Zand has a brilliant quote here that I really relate to. When everything is on fire, faith is not the answer that ends the pain. It is the hand that holds on in the dark, the refusal to let go of the God who has refused to let go of us. Zan writes this out of a season of spiritual darkness. This last week he shared with us when 1,000 people left his church because he said the gospel should not be associated with American military power. His witness is the dark night is not the absence of faith, but often is its deepening. That lament is not the failure of trust, but one of its truest forms. And that the God we find at the bottom is not the accountant we feared who is keeping score, but the crucified one who is already there in the fire with us. In the Russian Orthodox Church, they describe that when you hit rock bottom, listen, and you will hear knocking. And it's Jesus wanting to come up. And that is the point of the cross, which we will keep returning to in this series. On the cross, God does not stand over human suffering, handing out sentences. You get this, like a anti-Oprah. You get cancer, you get cancer, you get cancer. He climbs inside it. He takes the worst the world can do, injustice, abandonment, agony, death, and he absorbs it. The hands you imagine clenched in punishment are, in fact, stretched out and pierced. That is your evidence for what God is doing in your pain. Not arranging it, but sharing in it. There is one more turn, the one that carries us out of comfort and into calling. Because the king who came to reclaim this world did not win the war and then leave us as spectators. The gospel sums up Jesus' whole public life in a single line. He went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil. Acts 10, verses 38. And then he turned to the ordinary people, the fishermen, the tax collectors, you and I, and said in effect, now you go about doing good and healing all who are oppressed by the devil. He sent them out to do the very things he had been doing, to heal the sick, free the captives, announce that the kingdom of God has come near. The pushback continues through a people. So here is the dignity hidden inside the warfare worldview. We are not bystanders in someone else's war, waiting to learn who wins. We are enlisted. Every time you sit with someone in their grief, instead of explaining it away, you push back the darkness. Every time you forgive instead of retaliate, you tell the truth at a cost. You feed someone, refuse to give up on a person the world has written off. You are taking ground back for the rightful king of this world. The kingdom does not advance by force. It advances exactly the way Jesus advanced it, through self-giving love, love in the darkness, or self-giving love. The darkness can't absorb or answer it. Hear this. Especially if you came in this morning and you're carrying something really heavy. Please hear this. This is not one more thing for you to perform. I'm not handing a grieving person a job. I'm not trying to throw a drowning person, hey, can you hold this? Sometimes in the hardest seasons, the only ground you can take back is to the refusal to believe the lie that God is against you. And that, too, is resistance. To be in your suffering and say, God is with me, God is not against me. That, too, is a strike against the darkness. But for many of us, the slow return of purpose, the discovery that our pain has not disqualified us, that we become people who carry light into someone else's night, turns out to be the deepest way God redeems what the enemy meant for harm. Henry Nouwen writes a brilliant book on this called Wounded Healers. Have you ever noticed that it's often someone who has walked through something that you are walking through that is able to be a ministry of presence to you like no one else can? God, in a mysterious way, allows us to take our woundedness and to minister to other people in that woundedness. So let's go back to the question in the dark that says, what did I do to deserve this? Jesus has already answered it. Standing in front of a man born blind. Neither. Stop searching your life for the crime. The suffering is not the verdict. There is no invoice with your name on it being paid in your body or your circumstances. What there is a God who came looking for you in it, who did not send you an explanation from a distance, because an explanation has never been what you needed. You needed to be not alone. And so the Word became flesh and moved into the neighborhood of human suffering. All the way down to a borrowed grave, so that there is now no darkness you can be in where you will not find that he has been there first. If you have been carrying this belief that you are suffering, your suffering is God's punishment, I want to set the burden down for you this morning, gently in his name. That God that you believe in does not exist. The real God is the one weeping at the tomb, the one on the cross, the one who looks at the person everyone else has written off and says, neither. And Jesus says, you're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame. There is no such cause and effect here. Look instead for what God can do. He is not against you. He is with you. And one day when you are ready, and not a moment before, he will put a part of that work back into your hands. And you will find that the very darkness that had its grip on you is the darkness where you were made to help and push back the darkness. This is how the kingdom comes. Not from a safe distance. Through people that he has met in the fire. Amen. Before I call the worship team up, I also just want to make a clarifying comment on my last sermon. I made a reference to Paul Hayes' book, Junk Food for the Soul. And my point in making that reference was to make the point that there is a long history of people wrestling with these questions and these assumptions that we have about God. And so I was trying to say that I'm not alone in my questioning of this, that Paul has also questioned these things. But as is the tradition with rabbis, and as Paul said, if we all agreed, it would be a really boring world. My view on God's wrath, being a God handing you over, is a view that I hold and I believe I can support. Paul shares a different view that he holds and he can support. We disagree, but we agree on the major things. And I think it's important for you as a church body to see, here, two ordained pastors are able to work together, even though we see nuances differently. We are still pursuing Jesus. So I just wanted to make that clear. I'm going to now invite the worship team to come and lead us in song.